Good evening, good morning, good afternoon. The debate on why CCC have participated in these, have taken up their seats in parliament following the flawed elections continues. Here is Tendai Biti in what I can only describe as damn lies, explaining why they took up those seats.
I come to Dennis' question that participating in parliament is legitimizing the fraudulent election. I with respect, I strongly disagree. Participating in parliament does not legitimize a process that was illegitimate and that was not credible. In political economy, and I can see Professor Jonathan Moyo, when you are an opposition like us, an alternative movement, in a socially dominated framework such as ours, when you're fighting one of the most complicated authoritarian regimes on the continent, you do four things. The first thing you do is you protect zones of autonomy. The second thing you do is you build a credible alternative. The third thing you do is you expose and isolate the opponent. The fourth thing you do is you stretch the opponent. I view our participating in this election as protecting a zone of autonomy. That space that we got, those 103 seats that we got, we have a right and a duty to protect those zones.
We can stop there. This is absolutely ridiculous. Let's be clear here. Elections are about giving the people of Zimbabwe a meaningful say in the governance of the country. What we are looking at when we're talking about eMDC, and now they've transformed themselves to CCC, is that they were elected by the people of Zimbabwe when they launched the party in 1999, on the basis that they will implement democratic changes that will stop Zanu PF rigging the elections. The party name itself implies that, Movement for Democratic Change. The truth of the matter is they have not implemented even one token democratic change. After 23 years, 5 of which in the GNU 2008 to 2013, they failed to implement even one meaningful democratic change. To keep on talking about we are protecting zones of autonomy, it's the most ridiculous argument anyone can have. During the GNU itself, that was the golden opportunity for eMDC to implement the reforms. They failed to implement even one reform. Why? Because Mugabe bribed them with trappings of power, ministerial cars. Tendai Biti himself was an honorable minister, as the title in this posting shows. Minister of Finance, the Republic of Zimbabwe. That was during the GNU. The primary purpose of the GNU was to implement the democratic reforms. I repeat that point. They failed to implement even one reform because Mugabe bribed them. What is interesting here is that Zanu PF cronies themselves were boasting about it. You ask them, why is CCC not failing to implement the reforms? And they openly admitted, Mazivanhu eMDC adzidza anyerere. MDC people have learned to enjoy the gravy train, the good life of the gravy train. They'll never rock the boat. And that is exactly what they did. They never rocked the boat. They never implemented even one meaningful reform in 5 years. The man he is referring to, Professor Jonathan Moyo, as his political guru, he was in the GNU, but on the Mugabe side. Of course, Jonathan Moyo, as Zanu PF strategist, would have known about bribing these guys so that they do not implement even one reform. So for him to be quoting the man who knew what was happening during the GNU is laughable. What is interesting here too is that towards the end of the GNU, when SADC leaders realized that no meaningful reform had been implemented, they told Tendai Biti and his colleagues in MDC, do not participate in these elections without reforms. They decided they were going to participate regardless. And they did, and they lost dismally. In 2015, Tendai Biti himself admitted that it was utterly meaningless. This is exactly what he said in an interview. Look, you can't keep on participating in flawed electoral processes that serve to give big benefits to dictators such as Robert Mugabe. Mugabe has perfected the art of winning elections, he admitted. And he admitted it was flawed to keep on participating. He clearly must have presented that argument to his fellow opposition members, but none of them accepted his arguments. And so he, in 2018, decided he was going to participate again. David Coulthard made the same argument, but he went one step further than Tendai Biti. He admitted that the election process in Zimbabwe was flawed. The 2013 election was so flawed, so illegal, that the only logical step was to withdraw. Why? Why didn't they withdraw then? He explained there. They had mistrust between the two factions, the MDC-T and the MDC-N, led by, initially led by Atham Tabara and then led by Welshman Nuve. They did not trust either side. They thought if we withdraw, the other side will participate and they would win the seats that they knew that Zanu PF was offering as to entice the opposition to participate. So we cannot keep on pretending that we don't know why the opposition have been participating in these elections. They've been participating out of greed. There it is in black and white. They participated in 2018 for the same reason they participated in 2013, for the same reason that they failed to implement even one meaningful reform during the GNU. Greed. We can pretend all we like that it wasn't. It is greed. And for him to now turn around and tell us that, oh, it's out of protecting the zones of, it's the most ridiculous argument he could present. Zanu PF knows that as long as they can rig elections and get the opposition to participate, they will get legitimacy. So it's a trade-off here. And Mnangagwa, since 2018, has actually added a sweetener to the opposition to entice them to keep on participating. He created this animal called pollard. And all participants of the presidential race who participate and lose the race, but acknowledge that the election was free, fair, and credible, they get the benefits of this animal called pollard. Political party actors dialogue. All it is just to entice the opposition to participate and to endorse the election. That's all it is. In fact, for these elections in 2023, Mnangagwa realized that there was going to be a flood of participants contesting the presidential race, presidential rat race. So he deliberately introduced this rule that said to participate in the presidential election, you had to pay a nomination fee of US $20,000. Of course, most people could not afford that. And in the end, there was only about 11 participants in this race. In 2018, there were 23. If it had not been for the $20,000 US for the presidential race, because it's only the losing presidential candidates who get the pollard frisbees, there would have been a lot more. And CCC, they participated because they also know that the parliamentary and senatorial seats and council seats that Zanu PF will allow the opposition to win, to entice them to keep on participating. I think it is the most ridiculous statement that I've ever heard from Tendai Biti. Of all the lies he has told, that is the dumbest lie he has ever made. There is no excuse for keep on participating in an election process that you know yourself is giving Zanu PF legitimacy. And you keep doing it out of greed. And then you want to pretend you're protecting zones of autonomy. Zanu PF is letting those zones of autonomy go because as long as you participate, you are giving the process legitimacy. And this year, if SADC and the AU had done before and endorsed these elections as substantially free, fair, and credible, we will be looking at a situation here where Zanu PF is legitimate and we are stuck with the regime for the next 5 years. The pretense that we participated so that we could now coerce Zanu PF into a situation where there is dialogue is ridiculous. Why didn't you get dialogue after 2013? Because SADC endorsed those elections and Zanu PF was declared the winner and given political legitimacy. And in 2018, you participated again. Why didn't you force for dialogue? Again, Zanu PF was endorsed as legitimate. They did not have to call for a dialogue with the opposition. They are legitimate. And if the same thing had happened this time, Zanu PF would not be talking about let's have a dialogue, which is what Tendai Biti is arguing in this case. So the truth of the matter is the political crisis was only brought about by SADC and the AU, who decided that these elections are not free, fair, and credible. And regardless of the opposition's participation, we are not going to endorse them. And our friends here are only trying to take advantage of it and appear as if it was part of their strategy. That is nonsense. That was not part of their strategy. In fact, by accepting their gravy train seats, they've literally put a feather in Zanu PF's cap that these elections were legitimate. And thank God that SADC are standing firm with the position that they gave after the election, that the elections were flawed and illegitimate and could not produce a legitimate government. If it was not for SADC, if SADC was to flip over and decide, okay, let's grant Zanu PF legitimate, there is nothing CCC are going to do. They're going to continue participating under the pretext that they're controlling the zones of autonomy. Let me be very clear here. Zimbabwe is a failed state because for the last 43 years, the country has been stuck with a corrupt, incompetent, and tyrannical Zanu PF regime. The only way to stop, to end this Zanu PF rule is to implement the democratic reforms so that the people of Zimbabwe have got a meaningful say in the governance of the country. If elections were free, fair, and credible, the people of Zimbabwe would have removed Zanu PF a long time ago. eMDC had the opportunity to implement the democratic reforms to make sure the elections were free, fair, and credible. The golden opportunity during the 2008 to 2013 GNU. They failed to implement even one reform because of greed, because Mugabe bribed them and they forgot all about the reforms. And all this wittering about we're protecting zones of autonomy is utter nonsense. What zones of autonomy were you protecting when you failed to implement even one meaningful reform during the GNU? And since you participated in 2013, and Zanu PF was in government, and you were just the opposition, just making noises in parliament, you could not stop Zanu PF doing whatever it pleased. And that's exactly what has been happening. If it was not for SADC, who stood this time and decided enough was enough, Zimbabwe would be stuck in this cycle of Zanu PF rigging elections, winning the majority in parliament, and winning the presidency and controlling government. And the opposition participating, winning those few seats, and giving the regime legitimacy. We cannot pretend that this was a meaningful strategy. This was just greed, and they're now trying to hide behind the greed by pretending this was protecting the zones of autonomy. Zanu PF was allowing them to win those seats because they needed the opposition to keep on participating to give the regime legitimacy. That is the honest truth. And I read again the quotation that Tendai Biti himself said in 2015. You can't keep on participating in flawed elections. That's safe to give big benefits to dictators such as Robert Mugabe. That is exactly what they've been doing. Now they've changed tune and pretend they've got to keep on participating in these flawed elections to give Zanu PF legitimacy, to protect our zones of autonomy. What a ridiculous statement. The opposition's primary purpose was to implement the democratic reforms and stop Zanu PF rigging the elections so that Zimbabwe could be moved back on track where the government of the day has the mandate of the people of Zimbabwe because they've won the majority of the votes. That was their primary purpose. They have abandoned it, pretending that they have got winning in rigged election strategies, telling people that to hide the fact that the real reason they're participating is greed. And when they've lost, they pretend, oh, we've got to participate because we're protecting our zones of autonomy. We can't have this meaningless cycle continuing anymore. I think by participating in these flawed elections, taking up their seats, even after SADC had said this process is flawed, CCC have shown clearly that they really do not care about reforms, about delivering free, fair, and credible elections. All they care about is having their share of the spoils of power. That's all they care about. And this brings us to what is going to happen next. I think we can see with the greed of both Zanu PF and CCC, they would want to be the driving seat of whatever government of national unity that has got to emerge out of this. They've got to be in the driving seat. They will insist that they should be in the driving seat. For Zanu PF, that is the only way they can be certain that no meaningful reforms are implemented, just as they did during the first GNU. And for CCC, they will want to pretend this was part of the strategy, of their grand strategy to finally get Zanu PF out, when in reality, they failed to implement even one meaningful reform in 23 years, and they've all but given up. They're hoping that this political situation gets so bad that people get so desperate, they either stage street protests or there is a coup. And they are waiting in the wings to claim the throne. What we need is to implement the democratic reforms, drain the sewage pond, which is Zimbabwe's present political system. It's only when we have drained the sewage pond and filled it up with clean water that we can have quality fish in it. Zanu PF and CCC is the kind of leaders you will get as long as you keep this sewage pond. Zanu PF does not want the sewage pond drained. CCC had the opportunity to drain it, they did not, and now they've given up. They just want their share of the spoils of power. Nothing would please CCC more than if the end of this is another GNU where they assume their old positions as in the first GNU. And I can rest assure you CCC have absolutely no agenda for reforms, for democratic reforms. And Zanu PF, that's exactly what they don't want to hear either. So we'll end up with a situation where we've got another GNU that lasts another 5 years, and at the end of it, no meaningful reforms have been implemented. And we have got the whole cycle starting all over again. The number one thing we want now is to get a competent GNU that will implement the reforms. And Zanu PF and CCC cannot play any part in that GNU for the simple reason that they are the same people who failed to implement even one reform during the last GNU. And it is naive to think they'll do so now. It is absolutely ridiculous to even suggest that they will do so. Before I go, I'll play the tape of Tendai Biti making his argument about this zone of autonomy.
I come to Denis' question that participating in parliament is legitimizing the fraudulent election. I with respect, I strongly disagree. Participating in parliament does not legitimize a process that was illegitimate and that was not credible. In political economy, and I can see Professor Jonathan Moyo, when you are in opposition like us, an alternative movement, in a socially dominated framework such as ours, when you're fighting one of the most complicated authoritarian regimes on the continent, you do four things. The first thing you do is you protect zones of autonomy. The second thing you do is you build a credible alternative. The third thing you do is you expose and isolate the opponent. The fourth thing you do is you stretch the opponent. I view our participating in this election as protecting a zone of autonomy. That space that we got, those 103 seats that we got, we have a right and a duty to protect those zones. To me, I've been a legislator for a long time. Parliament is a very powerful platform for defending the constitution, for defending citizen interests and advocating citizens' interests. So to me, it's not a brainer. The elected MPs must participate in that platform. What is required, Danny, is to create a soft landing for Zimbabwe, is to avoid another 5 years of stagnation, another 5 years of toxicity, another 5 years in respect of which the country veers to almost a genocidal status quo. Rwanda in 1994, for instance. So to me, there must be dialogue. To me, there must be discussion. I hope SADC will act on this report and allow a dialogue to take place so that there is a soft landing for this country. We can't afford another 5 years of the same ossification that we've seen in the last 5 years. As I'm talking to you right now, thousands and thousands of Zimbabweans are trying to cross crocodile-infested Limpopo into South Africa. Thousands are applying for visas at the British embassy, at the American embassy. That's not good enough. That's not good enough. So this election is triggering yet another vicious wave of immigration, illegal and otherwise. We've become the sick men of the region. Yeah.
Well, we are the sick men of the SADC region, all right. We had the opportunity to implement the reforms and correct that. And CCC, eMDC sold out. This is the truth. This is the reality that we've got to deal with. And to keep on pretending that somehow CCC will change over and end this dictatorship with their present beliefs is naive. Zimbabwe cannot afford to have this second GNU and then find at the end of the day that no meaningful reforms were implemented. It is that simple. We have got to make sure that this time we get it right. We don't want these meaningless arguments about protecting zones of autonomy and stretching the opposition. That is not what people wanted, what the country wanted. The country wanted democratic reforms implemented. This idea that we can win rigged elections is a nonsensical idea. Only parties like CCC, eMDC, and CCC now could come up with such a foolish idea. We can win rigged elections. What a heap of nonsense. You give Zanu PF carte blanche powers to rig elections, and then you think you can come up with strategies to win those rigged elections. They only come up with those ideas to hide the fact that CCC are participating in these elections out of greed. And I'm disappointed because somebody like Tendai Biti, David Coulter, I think with a few opposition politicians, many people held in high regard. And they participated in these elections out of greed. And I think David Coulter was telling the truth when he said that. And Tendai Biti has never explained why he changed his mind in 2013 until now. And now he's telling us this blue lie that he is participating to protect zones of autonomy. As long as these few people get these few seats, they will keep on participating in these elections, no matter how flawed the process gets. That is the truth that Zimbabweans should be aware of here. And we need to get out of this mess. The only way to get out of it is to implement the democratic reforms and stop messing around. We need reforms. And to think that Zanu PF and eMDC or CCC will implement those reforms is being naive. Absolutely naive. The people have waited for 43 years independence to have a meaningful say in the governance of the country. The country is in serious economic trouble. Nearly 49% of our people are living in abject poverty. We need an end to this madness. The GNU that's going to come must implement the reforms without failure. It's absolutely not, we can't take even a chance that there may not be reforms implemented. That is completely out. You're having a second bite at the cherry. Let's make it count. And Tendai Biti's explanation for participating confirms to me that CCC have now completely changed to the point where during the GNU, if one said they were running with the povo here during the day and hunting with the Zanu PF thugs at night, with this, is clearly shown they are now running, hunting with the Zanu PF hounds day and night. And that clearly shows that they're now part of the problem in Zimbabwe. They cannot be part of the solution too. We need a solution to Zimbabwe's political situation. SADC and the AU have given us the opportunity to get the reforms implemented. We cannot be found wanting on that one. This time we must make sure we know what we want and insist that we get people who are competent to get the job done. We don't want another feeble excuse why not even if a few reforms are implemented. We want all the reforms implemented correctly and thoroughly. Zimbabwe can become a healthy and functioning democracy. It's not rocket science. We know now that CCC, they are no longer fighting on the people's corner. And this statement by Tendai Biti confirms that. Personally, I'm disappointed. I can't believe that he could ever bow that low to issue such a foolish statement. He knows that it's foolish. He knows that it is a lie. He himself admitted the fallacy of participating in flawed elections. What has changed? Now he's saying it is no longer a fallacy. The futility of participating in flawed elections. Now you are telling us that it is no longer futile to participate. How ridiculous. Zimbabweans have got to wake up. This is an opportunity to get the reforms implemented. And we cannot be found asleep. We have got to be awake and make sure that whoever gets appointed into the next GNU implements those reforms. We cannot afford to slip up. That I cannot overemphasize. I'm disappointed by some people who keep on listening to some of these idiotic arguments by our opposition. They sold out during the GNU. They continue to sell out after that. And now they want to continue to do so and think they can hoodwink us into believing some of their absolutely ridiculous arguments. Can't believe this. This is ridiculous. I would strongly recommend that Zimbabweans really make the effort this time to make sure that we have got a new GNU. We support SADC and the AU in making sure that that GNU, the people appointed in that GNU are competent people and they will implement the reforms and not forever be giving us feeble excuses. I can't overemphasize that. We cannot afford another GNU and find at the end of it only a fraction of the reforms are implemented. All of the reforms must be implemented and correctly. We cannot afford to be wasting time anymore on rigged elections. Thank you and good night.